suffering.
Sorry. Okay. All right. Damn it. I forgot to press record. Okay. Too bad. We'll work that out later. Okay. So
we can do again another one, another time.
We can do another one at another time. Exactly correct. So, and you'll be happy to hear that I did that with Robert Whittaker as well.
Yeah, no, Bob. I met him a couple of times.
I know, he's a legend. Anyway, my recording skills, whatever. Anyway, so what I wanted to get to was in the past 4 years since your son's diagnosis and you going out into the community and speaking about your experience and publishing in different journals, etc. What have you seen change?
I'm starting to publish. Didn't publish much because I had no story to tell.
But now you do.
No, I do. Yes.
Yeah. So the preceding time was a lot of research.
Yes, it was.
Yeah, absolutely. And as a result, you and your son and your family, it's a different story that you have to tell.
Yes, so that's what we started to do.
Yes, and going out into the community and speaking about this, what changes have you seen in people's reactions to you?
Well, in Little Belgium, we're a country with two big communities, and the Flemish and the Walloons, so the Dutch-speaking and the French-speaking. There was a professor of psychology at the University of Leuven who knows Jaco Sekula, who knows about open dialogue. He organized some summer workshops. A number of professionals have participated. And there is now a team in Bruges, Bernam, that applies open dialogue, and they just completed the Open Dialogue Foundation training, 20 days with Nick Putman. And I'm living in the northern part of Belgium, so in Flanders, in the Flemish side. And if we want to get our government to do something, the two communities have to do the same, have to be concerned.
What do you mean? Sorry, what do you mean by that?
So the national government works for the nation.
Right.
And medicine, psychiatry is still the national government with the national insurance reimbursing costs.
Right.
If only Flanders is interested, the national government will do nothing.
Ah.
So I introduced, that was in the spring of 2018, I started to introduce open dialogue in the French-speaking part of Belgium. And the professionals at first didn't react it, but a number of parents did. And so we started with what we called a de facto association. It's legal, but we don't have any constraints with administration and things like this. So we do say, and our first objective had been to develop awareness by organizing a 2 days short course, an open dialogue. We did that with Nick Putman. We invited him to come over to Belgium. We had translators ensuring the simultaneous translation. And it was successful, so we did it a second time, because in science we say when it happens once, it's coincidence. When it happens twice, it is science. And then it's not enough. And when it happens thrice, it is business. And so
really, is that really how?
So we've done 3 times the short course. It worked each time. We got a bit more money than break even, so we didn't have to pay the shortage from our personal pocket. And now some French people came to our short courses. They took over the organization because we're a bit exhausted after three times. And these 2 days, today and tomorrow, is the 5th edition of this short course.
Wow.
French speaking. Yeah.
And most of the people who are coming along to these short courses that you've done are parents, family.
They're about, say, 75% are parents, 15% are sufferers, and 10% are professionals.
Right.
Roughly. Maybe let's say 70% parents, 15% sufferers, and 15% professionals.
Right. And sorry, carry on.
Yeah, we even have psychiatrists attending our short courses.
Yeah.
And so they immediately became all psychiatrists.
Yes.
Because they're more willing to help our children to taper.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
And I guess it is that thing of it's not that thing of all of psychiatry is corrupt and evil and rotten.
Well, it's 99%.
Yes, I guess, the institution, that way of thinking, that way of teaching, that way of training and believing and treating people, yes, it is. But individual psychiatrists, individual psychiatrists who are actually in the profession to help people, they will be coming along to what you're offering, really, but they're very much in the minority still, yes?
Yeah, and then they're in a system where they're not allowed to move a lot. Because otherwise the guild, the corporation will take the license away. So the flexibility is very limited.
Yes, and have you come across Dr. Yolanda Lucia here in Australia?
I heard about her and I've followed some of her conferences.
Yes, so she's an Australian psychiatrist that has happened to, and I mean any psychiatrist, psychologist, mental health worker, including myself, who've spoken up about diagnoses and misdiagnoses and medications and the harm done. I imagined at the beginning that that would have been a gift to the profession and to the field, but that's not the case. I was sacked. Everyone that I know who has challenged this way of being, they don't last very long.
Well, what I see as well is that when psychiatrists retire, then they do dare to speak about open dialogue and so on, because they no longer risk the license to be taken away.
Yes, but it's also that thing of imagining.
It's too late. It's too late because they're out of the profession.
Yes, but in the meantime, a whole career has been spent in damaging people. Really, that's the way that I see it: damaging people, ruining people's lives, and that's very definitely what I see. And I really, do not understand why people such as yourself, whose son was diagnosed, and yes, you were lucky in knowing an alternative way of dealing with this right from the beginning, and also your training as a scientist.
I first had to find an alternative.
Yes, but you had that gut reaction that there's something wrong here. You mentioned, what was that curve?
Dose effect curve.
Yes, so can you explain that again? Sorry.
Yes, when you increase the doses of psychiatric drugs, then the effect is changing.
Yes.
And at some moments you get a very high toxicity.
Yes.
And when you go too high, you could even kill the person.
Correct.
But at some moment you have to limit and stay within the safety of the dose effect curve. So you cannot go to the top. So that you have. That's why you need a safety limit. But even then, when they increase the dose by a factor of 2, 3, 4, sometimes, where's the dose effect curve? How do they know? And then this, statistically speaking, people fall within a normal distribution, the Gauss curve. And there are the very sensitive people and there are the less sensitive people.
Yes.
And then there is the bulk of people in the middle. And I never saw that either. How can they know that?
Absolutely.
So the minimum, the maximum, there should be two dose effect curve with a mean in the three curve. I never saw that.
Yeah, exactly. And it's that thing of you with your scientific background, you would know to look for that. But the ordinary person, they would put their trust into the psychiatrist who's given them, you know, a diagnosis about their child, that it's a lifelong condition, you'll require medications, etc. So it is that thing of you came to this experience with a background that equipped you to question from the beginning.
Yeah, and something terrible when the psychiatrist tells you that it's incurable is genetics. And I met many fathers when the psychiatrist says genetics, it's like if he was shooting very violently into their balls. You know, that is very, very painful. So that you need at least 2 hours to recover from such a shot. And when I was telling to these fathers, they didn't want to see a psychiatrist ever again in their life. So they let their wives to go to the psych ward to fetch their son and so on. They're so hard that they don't want. And when I told them, well, there's nothing genetics, look, here's the evidence, the probability to suffer from a genetic defect is less than 1 in a million. Whereas the probability to suffer schizophrenia is just under 1%, which is a 10,000 times factor more. So the genetic hypothesis is invalid. But these fathers so hurt, they start to cry on my shoulder.
Absolutely.
Because they're so relieved.
Absolutely.
They're so relieved. So my daughter, my son could be cured. So for them, it's unthinkable.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, and that's part of this ripple effect of damage and ruination and, you know, and criminality that happens on a constant basis, because the diagnosis doesn't just affect, you know, your son or the person with the diagnosis. It's that whole story of psychiatry, that this is a genetic illness, you know, and therefore has been passed on to your child, can be passed on further.
Yeah, and then the brothers and sisters, when they heard this genetics, they say, they're afraid. They say, how are we going to find the love of our life? Because nobody wants a schizophrenic child.
Correct. And it's a lie. You know? It's just a lie, and it's such an easily disprovable lie.
I had plenty of young women, when I was explaining them what happened to their brother or their sister, it's not genetics, they start to cry.
Absolutely.
Because they're so relieved as well. So there's the terrible lie, the terrible violence of psychiatrists against families.
Absolutely. I mean, and that's exactly it. It's violence against families, because it's not, it's that whole story which is based on a lie, which people believe unless they have someone such as yourself, someone such as all of the different advocates, lived experience, you know, to enable them to question the power. Really, it's questioning power, it's telling truth to power. And still, it's the fact that psychiatry relies on forced treatment, you know, and that's an actuality.
They not just rely on forced treatment, they do that with the authorization of the state.
Correct.
It's legal. It's legal to be violent against our children who are suffering. And that's why so we have to attack the state to stop paying psychiatry, abusing our taxes to pay psychiatry.
Absolutely. So as far as that, because I'm thinking back to that trialogue Zoom session that you told me about that happened a few days ago, and it's coming at this from that legal perspective and attempting to change laws so that state sanctioned violence isn't possible.
Trialogue is not enough.
No, but what have you seen that might be enough?
We need pentalogue, 5.
Including the government?
The government and the shareholders. of the pharmaceutical industry. You have to attack. They're abusing our tax money.
Yeah.
And we taxpayers, finally, we are the client of the system because we are paying the system. And instead for the state to pay per occupied bed and to reimburse prescription for 100% of the sufferers, in open dialogue is maximum 15% who get psychotropic drugs. 85% don't get these drugs. So when you prescribe that to 100%, it's 85% of useless prescription that brings money to the shareholders of the pharmaceutical industry. And the state is doing that, abusing our money.
Absolutely correct. Absolutely.
So we the taxpayers, we are the main force who can change the system. We have to realize the abuse. And instead of paying per occupied bed, the state has to start to pay for performance, pay per cure.
And that means paying for recovery, paying for those people who have actually recovered.
Yes.
As opposed to those people who will be a patient, a lifelong patient in the mental health system. Yeah.
So pay for performance.
Yes, exactly. And you would imagine that would be a no-brainer. You would imagine that any person with a conscience, or even without a conscience, but with some level of intelligence, or even able to look at it from an economic perspective, would automatically go, of course we'll do this. Of course we'll do this because it obviously works.
It's a quality price perspective. The quality of the service delivered that has to lead to a cure, and the price that has to be cheaper than psychiatry.
Yes, but it also is that thing that, I know your story, I know my story, I know, dozens of other people personally, and, hundreds, online who are fully recovered. Out of the system, who have their lives back. And one would imagine that if a system, whether it be a medical system or a government system or whatever, we're looking at that as results, that they would go, obviously this is what works and this does not work for this individual, for this family, this does not work. What we have here is a whole bunch of people who've been damaged and who are ruined and are not productive members of society, even if you come at it from that perspective, versus all of these other people, such as your son, such as me, such as vast numbers of other people who have managed to work their way out of their diagnosis and work their way out of psychiatry, and have their lives back, and are fully functioning people, and if you compare those two, you would imagine that a system, whether it be the health system, psychiatry, government system or whatever, would automatically go, if they had the best interests of people at heart, they would go, this works, this is what we're going to fund. But that doesn't happen.
No, because the shareholders influencing the politicians and corrupting the system, they want to keep this money flowing to them.
It's a lot of money.
Yeah, and they don't care for the sufferers because the sufferers are the source of money.
Correct.
And when sufferers die 20 years sooner than average, it doesn't matter because they will be replaced by some others.
Correct. Yeah, it's an endless feed.
And even more, with DSM-13, there was a development of pedopsychiatry. They're not even drugging 2-year-old toddlers. So they expanded the market.
Absolutely. And I guess this just brings me back to my question, on an ongoing basis, why would not, a father such as you instantly, sue the person who gave your sons a diagnosis? Why would you not at least pursue that? Why?
When I came back from Western Lapland, for my visit to the Open Dialogue, the success, I went to see a lawyer. And I asked him, in the code of deontology of the medical doctors, article number 4, it's stated that every medical doctor has to keep himself really abreast on the latest advances in medical science.
Mhm.
And they don't do it.
Mhm.
So I wanted to ask this lawyer, how about suing them? Because now I came back from Western Lapland, I've seen the real thing, and these medical doctors don't pay attention to the innovation. They even refuse to pay attention. So they're not respecting the deontology code.
Mm.
And he said to me, Luc, you're never going to win.
Mm.
Because the judge will appoint an expert,
Mm.
and the expert will be a psychiatrist, not a toxicologist.
Mm.
And the psychiatrist in his report will say, look, all these psychiatrists, they are doing the up-to-date things. They all have the new DSM-5 published in May 2013 on their desk. We were in June 2013, so 1 month later. And he said, you see this, and the judge, he will never question the report of the expert. So you will never win. So I asked him, next step, how about suing the 2,000 psychiatrists of Belgium? So the judge will not be able to appoint an expert.
Good question.
Yeah.
I like it. I like it.
So the lawyer said, yes, it is possible, but there is a cost, because once you file a complaint, then the justice will have to send an invitation to the court, and per person is 250 euros for just the invitation. So he says that the start of the cost is just 250 euros around. I think the time was 232, but it doesn't matter. 250 times 2,000, it was already €500,000.
That's right. Oh dear.
So
have to get a loan.
it is feasible if you win the lottery, the Euro Millions. Otherwise, you cannot afford it.
That's right. Not on your latest paycheck.
So the question was good, but on the price was makes it impossible. So the third question: how about attacking the order of the medical doctors, the corporation, because their medical doctors do not follow the deontology code. So, if you attack, they're just a non-profit organization, they're going to lose, and they don't mind, because anyway they have no money. It's a non-profit organization, so they will start again with a new name the day after, and you will have wasted your time and your money, because you have to pay for the lawyers.
Yeah.
And suing the industry in Europe, well, then you're going to sue for what? How many drugs had your son from how many different companies? Which one has harmed him? Can you prove it? So, and even if you could prove it, then you will never get the hundreds of $1,000s that they get in America. Because in Europe, the laws for reimbursing are much softer than in the USA. So he said, it's no point. He said, what you could do is to open a blog and try to have some 200 to 300 people interested. And then you make a group and you sue all together, you sue the state. Then you have only one time to pay 250 euros for the invitation for the state to come to court. But then how are you going to raise and to assemble friends, 300 minimum? Then, and how are you going to convince other parents? So I was aware of open dialogue at that time, but I had no results. And so you need to convince other people to play with you and to pay lawyers and to sue the state, and they don't have the knowledge. So first you have to develop at least some kind of result with my son. I had no time to do that at that time. But since last year, we now have a non-profit organization, and instead of suing the state, we want to emulate Norway, where 4 associations of parents and 1 of professionals obtained the 2015 law. I don't know if you're aware of that. And the 2015 law of Norway made it compulsory for every psychiatric hospital of Norway to open a 6 to 8 bed units where to apply a non-medication approach.
Okay, yes.
And so it's a kind of a soteria home within the hospital.
Right, right.
And in northern Norway, it's working fine because they're aware about open dialogue. They've been trained, and so they use it routinely with the patients. And I know, so I met the very first patient, and today she's out. She has managed to heal. But in southern Norway, where they're not trained to open dialogue, these units are a disaster.
Really?
So then psychiatrists, they stay and psychologists, they all stay within the habits, within the traditional training, and they cannot imagine better.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, and I guess it still for me, it still comes back to that failure of imagination for a start, but it's the truly Kafkaesque, Kafka, catch-22 notion of, something being totally workable in, one part of Norway where people have been trained in open dialogue and where the evidence the evidence is irrefutable. You have the evidence, you have people walking out and continuing on with their life. And you have the other comparison of, the same thing having been set in place, but people who are untrained in that. And why on earth would you do something as stupid and as unethical as that? You set up the same system in a different part of the same country, but you put in people who are trained differently, who are trained in a way that is not going to enable people to heal and walk on with their life. And it's just ridiculous. I mean, it is. It reminds me of...
They forgot, these associations of parents and professionals forgot about the training. They didn't know.
Right. I guess...
But now in Belgium, we do now in our group. And so we want the state to organize the reimbursement of the healing therapies of all forms of mental illnesses. So we're not just focusing on psychosis, schizophrenia. We also go to autism, ADHD, anorexia, bulimia, and so on.
Right.
Because there's a kind of continuum between the forms of mental illnesses.
Yeah, yeah.
And then we can get a big group. And so we want the reimbursement of the therapies, which is not the case today, which is why psychiatrists, psychologists, nurses, and so on make no effort to learn them.
Yeah.
And we want also the teaching to students in institutes and universities, because the young people will make the change. We want the training of the professionals who are willing to follow that. The old professionals, they will retire so soon, they will be no longer harming our children. And also we want the state to invest in research for optimizing the healing therapies.
Yeah, and you're stating all of that as, we want this to happen. Are you lobbying the government for this to happen? You lobbying the medical profession?
One thing at a time. Now we are recruiting other members because we need a critical mass of people to get that.
Right.
If we only 40 voices, is not enough.
Yeah, I get you.
So it's something we have to build.
Yes, and I guess the best that I can gain from conversations with people such as you is at least that there's hope. At least there is some change happening. And if your voices aren't heard, if your voices aren't at least as loud as the voices which back up the supposed science of psychiatry and medications, and those voices are backed by gazillions of dollars in funding behind them, with pharmaceutical promotion, all of that sort of thing. If your voices aren't there being as equally as loud and as heard, then nothing will change. So your family, your story, all of the other people that you've spoken to, you're the voices of hope. You know, you're the voices of hope and change, and not only that, but you're the evidence. You know, you're the evidence. You know, your son is the evidence. You know, your son. You know, your family.
It's not entirely out. Yeah, it's not entirely out as yet, but he's a long way.
And you know that he will be, you know, because you've seen the evidence yourself. You know, you've seen other people, you know, who've come through this, you know, who've come out the other side.
I expect him to will be, but I cannot claim it as yet.
No, and I guess that's a conservative, safe approach to take. But you know, I wish you well. You know, I just wish you well, and I thank you for all of this. And just before we close, you know, I'd like, because I did do that thing again of forgetting to record from the beginning, but it is, you know, it is this cross-cultural perspective that I see as being the most promising to enable people to see, you know, to be able to not believe what they're told, to not believe what they're culturally conditioned to believe, really. And it's that story of, you know, behind you, next door somewhere, there is Rwanda. Yeah, Rwanda. Yeah. Most of the world knows, you know, suffered that horrendous genocide. And tell me that part of the story again, where Western psychiatry came in and psychology came in to save the day. What happened there?
This was a report from Andrew Solomon that we can find on the internet. I can search the reference and send it to you, so you can read. It's a short article. So after the genocide, plenty of psychiatrists and psychologists from the West flew to Rwanda. I guess they wanted to be tourists and visit the national park and the volcanoes, the gorillas and things like this. It's fun. And supposedly they would serve professionally with their way of applying psychiatry and psychology. But the Rwandan people didn't like this approach of being invited in shabby rooms for supposedly therapy. And the Rwandan recipe for depression is sun, drum, dance, and community.
So they said no.
Yeah, and I think the title of the article is even the Rwandan prescription for depression is sun, drum, dance, and community. Yeah. And they said, we don't want to be in a shabby room. We want to be out. We want to feel that the community came to give us joy back, and we need that. So
yeah, absolutely. And it's just that very different cultural belief, you know, that enables you to recognize what's happened to you and what's happened to your community, you know, and what the prescription that will work and make things better, as opposed to, you know, the prescription, like the drug prescription, you know, that will not work, and it certainly won't make things better, you know. And it is that thing of people being educated in this way, or re-educated, you know, away from that view of, you know, this is how we fix your problems. We fix your problems with a diagnosis and a prescription pad, really, and sitting you in a dark room. none of which is good. You know, most of us would prefer to do a bit of drumming and dancing and hanging out in the sun, really. So, golly, Luc, what would you like to say as a final, you know, thing?
I posted you today on Messenger the story of our family just got published in an academic peer-reviewed journal. Narrative Inquiry into Bioethics.
Beautiful.
And I sent the reference. And so this is my first academic paper, and now as recommended by the general practitioner or family doctors. I'm starting to write a review for one of the top 10 journals read by general practitioners.
Beautiful.
About healing so-called mental illnesses.
Good. And your son, and how is he in the world?
He's living on his own in his apartment. He's driving his car. He's going to therapy now every day, because I was fed up to see that it takes so long. So it is, he has 4 different therapists. And his grandmother it's kind of a merciful love from her that he gets, like the Michael Cornwall wrote a paper about that. Yeah. So I wrote a thank you letter to Michael, and he was crying.
Wow, how wonderful.
And so he's making tremendous progress since I decided he has to go to therapy every day, 7 days per week.
Wow. And that will come to an end, you know, that beautiful thing of, you know, he will come to that point where he can say, you know, enough, I've sorted this stuff for myself enough. And that's the end, you know, as opposed to, you know, if you have a diagnosis and if you've had the medications, you know, you're in the hands and the clutches and in the control of a system for the rest of your life. You know, you don't get to say, no, I've had enough. Thank you, I've had enough. I don't want to talk about this anymore. Enough. Really?
He's very grateful that we gave him the opportunity to get out of psychiatry.
Of course, my God. Yeah, a very different life, a very different life. I'm so glad. I'm so happy to speak to you, and I'm so happy to know you, you know, in this way. And I send you much love and your son and your family, and wish you a Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas too, Karen.
All right. Thanks, Luc. Have a lovely day or night, whichever it is.
Night.
Okay. Bye. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye, Karen.
Bye.
Thank you for your invitation. Bye-bye.
All right. See you.